Good morning. Our chalice lighting is excerpted from the UU Minister Elizabeth Mount, The Right to Choose. Today, we come to this holy place and time, ready to invoke the divine, to make space for the sacred, to co-create community once again. This too is a choice. You cannot, you may not be coerced into relationship with the holy or with one another. I invite you, I ask you to join us. I respect it if you will not, today or ever. More sacred than any other individual need is choice. The right to know oneself, the right to know what you are ready for, what you need, to stretch when you can, to pause when you will, to know your body, your mind, your spirit better than anyone else, and ultimately to be trusted with the responsibility of your own living.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dylan Q. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. I'd like to open this morning by sharing the following excerpt from the New York Times, dated May 22nd, 1967. The article is entitled, "Clergymen Offer Abortion Advice" by Edward B. Fisk. 21 Protestant ministers and rabbis in New York City have announced the establishment of a clergyman's consultation service on abortion to assist women seeking abortions. The Reverend Howard R. Moody, spokesman for the group, said that its services, which begin today, would include assistance in obtaining legal therapeutic abortions and advice on such alternatives as keeping the child or having him put up for adoption. If legal therapeutic abortion is not possible, but an abortion is indicated, we will try to get the woman the best possible medical advice to take care of her problem pregnancy, Moody said. Today, we will ask, what is our own role in addressing the crisis before us? With our own rights and liberties under threat from the recent Dobbs decision, how can we respond? How do we keep each other safe? We first look to our histories of resistance for inspiration and guidance. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure you all want to know more about this young person here. So I've done a little investigating. The first time I had the opportunity of being exposed to Dylan was in February at the auction of art that we had. And Dylan was a great auctioneer there. And then I became active in the Congregational Life Committee, and there was Dylan again. Okay. Now, Dylan has been in the area since his youth. He went to Johnston School and then went to Chicago to go to St. Vincent de Paul. But he's now employed with a company that's called Gain Consulting, and his title is Solutions Manager. And boy, do we need somebody like that. Well, they seem very eager to be involved in our church, and they just started coming here last summer, so it's been a year. So I think they've done a great job at getting involved, and hope you will get to know them better. Okay. Welcome, here we are, to First Unitarian Church. My name's Barbara Martin, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm your celebrant today, obviously. So whether you're here for an hour or a lifetime or somewhere in between, thank you for joining us in this community that grows ethically and spiritually, serves justly, and loves radically. This sermon is being recorded and will be available to view later on the church's website and YouTube page. And if you're joining us by Zoom, feel free to keep your cameras on, but please mute your mics for the consideration of others. And if you are joining us in person, children is families with children. All right, that one doesn't seem to apply. Okay. And that's it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And we get to sing now, number 119 in the Gray Book, Once to Every Soul and Nation. Once to every soul and nation comes the moment to decide. In the strife of truth with falsehood, for the good or evil side, there to stand with truth is noble when we share his stretching cross, and that cause bring fame and profit, and his cause to be just. From the cause of evil prosper, it is truth alone is strong. Though its portion be the scaffold, and upon the thorny wrong, then it is a brave one chooses, while the proverb stands aside, till the multitude may let go of the faith they have denied.
Well, thank you, Barb, very much for that introduction. I very much appreciate that, and thank you all for giving me the opportunity to join you. The work of justice is an intergenerational one. The legacy of resistance has been handed down to us, and so must we hand it down to the next generation. So I'd like to take this time to speak to the children of all ages here in the room or watching at home. Today we're talking about a complicated topic, and one that many people feel very strongly about. But really what we're talking about is standing up for what is right and taking care of each other. There are times when our country hasn't treated people fairly or kindly. Sometimes the people in power pass laws which single out others based on their gender, their skin color, or the kinds of people they love. When laws or rules are unfair, we have to stand up for what is right. We do this by voting for the things that we care about. Sometimes we do this by marching and protesting to show how upset we are about what is happening. Those things are important, but we also have to take care of each other. When things are hard, we have to help each other stay safe and stay healthy. That's what it means to be in a caring community. You may have had a time in your own life that you've seen someone that maybe was getting picked on or maybe didn't have too many friends or people that they could talk to at school. And sometimes the best thing that you can do for those people is just go and try to be kind to them. Try to be their friend. See if there's anything you can do to help. Someday you might need some help too. And you'll be grateful if someone is around to ask what you need and to offer that help to you. Thank you all for listening to my words this morning. In challenging times, communities like ours come together to stand firm against injustice. We gather and remember that there is still hope for change. There are still good-hearted people willing to fight for a better world. Our offerings each week support the work in our own congregation and beyond. Half of this morning's offering will go to the congregation's social justice work, and half will be split with our Faith in Action partners, whom I am informed through the end of August will still be Knock and Drop and Just Voices, to support their work in our communities. For those of you joining us by Zoom, we encourage you to use the giving page on the church's website or mobile app. You'll also find the link posted in the chat.
Bruce is joined this morning for our offertory music by Don Seaver, and they will be playing Flor de Lino by Stamponi, if you wanted to know.
Thank you very much, Don and Bruce, for that lovely rendition. Before we continue, I would invite you all to make time for stillness. Please rest your body comfortably in your chair. Notice the feeling of your feet on the ground and your body at rest. Relax your shoulders and breathe as deeply as you are able. I'd invite you to imagine a small white light in your chest that grows when you breathe in and shrinks when you breathe out. And on that, we will spend the next minute in quiet meditation, contemplation, or prayer. In this congregation, made distant by space, but connected by care for one another, we gather each Sunday to tend to one another's joys and concerns. Here in this space, we lift up the names of those people we hold in our minds and hearts, aloud or silently. If you are joining us by Zoom, carrying someone in joy or concern this morning, you may share that in the chat box. We do have some additional joys and sorrows to share this week. Christy Michaud Haynes, her 12-year-old granddaughter, was admitted to the hospital on July 1st and is undergoing care. But a joy is that Christy expects a visit from this granddaughter for the first time in 4 years soon. Leanne Beck had surgery on her back Wednesday, July 6th, and was released to her home in Indianola on the same day. She would appreciate receiving emails. She and Dash are well stocked with food for the coming week. Ed Hodgkin gathered with his family this week in Grinnell to say goodbye to his mother, who died midweek. Ed would appreciate your support at this time. I additionally would like to send out my heart to the victims of the shooting in Highland Park, which occurred over the 4th of July weekend. Let our hearts also be with all those near and far, with people the world over who are in need of care and who care for their communities, for people who work to meet the needs of their communities, for those continuing to speak out against injustice, for frontline workers in healthcare and service industries, for families and communities grieving the loss of loved ones. May we bear witness to atrocities that flash before our eyes in quick succession. May we bear witness to the struggles to overcome, which we have not yet seen. In the tradition of our congregation, we light 3 candles, one for the joys and concerns we have shared, one for the names we have raised up, and one for all of those that remain unspoken, but present here in our hearts. Gathered here together, we take a moment to honor these joys and sorrows.
Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Our first reading from The Story of Jane by Laura Kaplan, who is a lifetime activist, a member of Jane, and a founding member of the Emma Goldman Women's Health Center in Chicago. During the 4 years before the Supreme Court's 1973 Roe versus Wade decision legalized abortion, thousands of women called Jane. Jane was the contact name for a group in Chicago officially known as the Abortion Counseling Services of Women's Liberation. Every week, desperate women of every class, race, and ethnicity telephoned Jane. They were women who could not care for a child and women who did not want a child. Some women agonized over this decision while others had no doubts. Each one was making the best decision about motherhood that she could make at that time. Organized in 1969, Jane initially counseled women and referred them to the underground for abortions. Other groups offering the same kind of crucial help took shape at this time throughout the country. But Jane evolved in a unique way. At first, the women in Jane concentrated on screening abortionists, attempting to determine which ones were competent and reliable. Because they quickly realized that as long as women were dependent on illegal practitioners, they would be virtually helpless. And soon Jane members learned from these competent abortionists the technical skills necessary to perform them. As members of the women's liberation movement, the women in Jane viewed reproductive control as fundamental to women's freedom. The power to act had to be in the hands of each woman. Her decision about an abortion needed to be underscored as an active choice about her life. Rather than being a passive recipient, a patient, she was expected to participate. Jane said, "We don't do this to you, but with you." Jane tried to create an environment in which women could take back their bodies, and by doing so, take back their lives. Our special music at this time, also by Don and Bruce, Coralera by Aita. Our second reading is excerpted from a poem by Adrienne Rich, a renowned poet, essayist, and feminist. She's created with bringing she is credited with bringing the oppression of women and lesbians to the forefront of poetic discourse. North American Time. When my dreams showed signs of becoming politically correct, no unruly images escaping beyond borders. When walking in the street, I found my themes cut out for me, knew what I would not report for fear of enemies' usage. Then I began to wonder. Everything we write will be used against us or against those we love. These are the terms. Take them or leave them. Poetry never stood a chance of standing outside history. One line typed 20 years ago can be blazed on a wall and spray paint to glorify art as detachment or torture of those that we did not love. Out also did not want to kill. We move, but our words stand, become responsible for more than we intended. And this is verbal privilege. Try sitting at a typewriter one calm summer evening at a table by a window in the country. Try pretending your time does not exist, that you are simply you, that the imagination simply strays like a great moth, unintentional. Try telling yourself that you are not accountable to the life of your tribe, the breath of your planet. It doesn't matter what you think. Words are found responsible. All you can do is choose them or choose to remain silent. Or you never had a choice, which is why the words that do stand are responsible. And this is verbal privilege. I am thinking this is a country where words are stolen out of mouths as bread is stolen out of mouths, and where poets don't go to jail for being poets, but for being dark-skinned, female, poor. I am writing this in a time when anything we write can be used against those we love, where the context is never given, though we try to explain over and over. For the sake of poetry, at least, I need to know these things. In North American time, time stumbles on without moving, only releasing a certain North American pain. Julia de Burgo wrote, "That my grandfather was a slave is my grief. Had he been a master, that would have been my shame." And this is a poet's words that are hung over a door in North America in the year 1983. The almost full moon rises timelessly, speaking of change out of the Bronx, the Harlem River, the drowned towns of the Quabbin Reservoir, the pilfered burial mounds, the toxic swamps, the testing grounds. And I start to speak again. Our centering song is number 170. Go, maestro. We are a gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for our lives. We are a gentle, for our lives.
The topic of today's sermon had its origin in March of this year when the state of Iowa enacted a ban on transgender women and girls, participating in women's school sports. Culture, it has been said, is the thin edge of the wedge used by reactionary forces to legally enforce discrimination against marginalized groups. The situation has changed, but the same tension is today in question. How do we respond when the force of law is used to restrict our human rights? I will not belabor the scale of the injustice of the recent Dobbs decision overturning Roe. I will not belabor the horrors that are already being seen and we expect to see in the coming weeks and months, as I'm sure those of you reading the news will see that for yourselves. Instead, I would like to focus on what happened in the past, our histories of resistance, and how people responded under circumstances that were similar. I will say at the beginning here, I am primarily going to refer to persons seeking abortions as women. This is likely accurate for the majority of people at that time, and however, it does not encompass the genders of all people who may have sought an abortion then or now. I additionally would like to acknowledge that the topic of reproductive justice is larger than access to abortion. Standing in support of reproductive justice also means standing against the endemic racism in our healthcare system and acknowledging the history of sterilization and eugenics faced primarily by Black and brown people in this country. I'd like to focus on the story of the Jane Collective as a tactic of resistance and a method of retaking power. The context in which Jane operated was one in which there were many forces working in concert. Earlier, you heard about the Reverend Howard Moody and the clergy in New York who put together a public abortion referral service. At the same time, women and others were fighting in legislatures and the courts to win access to abortion and other reproductive services. Additionally, in Chicago, there was a small group of women who came together in defiance of the law to help women take control of their own reproductive rights. Then, as now, a multiplicity of tactics were deployed towards the end of equality. Jane was an organization shaped by the women's liberation movement, but not bound by it. There was no particular feminist doctrine to which all members subscribed. The members came from many walks of life, married, single, activists, or lay people to the movement. Some were members of organizations like the National Organization for Women. Others expressed fundamental disagreements with those goals or methods. Nonetheless, what drawing these women together was a desire to meet an acute and crying need in their community. This need drove their organization and all of its activities. They were responding to a call. Now, at that time in 1967 and 1969, what abortions were available were controlled primarily by the medical establishment. Where they were legally allowed, it was solely upon the determination of doctors that the mother was suicidal or otherwise in mortal danger. Many women had a limited understanding of their reproductive systems or what the process of an abortion actually entailed. The news was filled with horror stories of back alley butchers and inaccurate information about the long-term effects of an abortion. Despite these fears, despite the fact that many of these women thought that they were walking into injury or death, over 11,000 contacted Jane during the 4 years that they were active and were provided abortions. By developing relationships with medical providers, Jane was initially able to guide women to safe treatment. They found who was reputable and discreet. They avoided doctors who were callous or lecherous to the women they referred. As their reach grew, the members of Jane found themselves in a position to negotiate. They could provide a steady source of income, provided that the abortion services were provided at a reasonable price and done well. This gave them the leverage to provide for women who could not afford the fee for the abortion, and eventually grew to them, the members of Jane, learning how to control the process from start to finish. Now, the going rate for an underground abortion at this time was about $300, or slightly less than $3,000 today. The Jane Collective made no bones about the fact that money was a requirement for this service. They asked the women who came to them, if you don't have the money, do you have a fur coat? Do you have a TV? Do you have a toaster? Do you have a brother? Do you have a boyfriend? Do you have an uncle, a cousin, anyone whom you can lean on for the money? Each woman was required to contribute something to her treatment. However, no woman was turned away for their inability to pay. While Jane did not reflect a particular ideology, they did incorporate a mission of education and consciousness raising for the women they worked with. They explained the process of a dilation and curettage, or DNC, which was the most common method performed at that time. They provided educational literature, including an early edition of what came to be Our Bodies, Ourselves. Their goal was to provide women the tools to understand their own bodies, as well as put them in control of, first, the procedure they were seeking, second, the process by which that procedure is going to happen, and third, how they would choose to live their own lives. Each woman was worked with a counselor to ensure that they understood exactly what was going to happen, to make sure that they were not being coerced into the process, and to follow up with them afterwards to check for complications. Now, there was, of course, the small matter of this being entirely illegal. At the time, the women in Jane found that they were treated with a certain benign neglect by law enforcement, not least because they were providing referral services to the wives and daughters of police officers in some cases. So long as they kept out of the open and there were no deaths associated with their services, they were largely able to evade police scrutiny. The women in Jane were also not blind to the fact that the majority of them, middle-class white women, would be treated leniently should anything come to pass. There was one notable raid on the service, which resulted in several arrests. However, as expected, the bail terms were lenient and the charges eventually dropped when the Roe decision was announced. These factors mitigated the individual risk of the women in Jane. However, they were always explicit with their clients that what they were doing was an illegal activity, and by paying for this service, those people were complicit. Now, tactically, the group used many methods to maintain anonymity in their actions. Different apartments were established as fronts where women would be directed before being driven to the location where the abortions were actually performed. The doctors typically worked anonymously, sometimes going as far as blindfolding the women during the procedure. Members of Jane also worked with doctors and pharmacists who were sympathetic to the cause in order to access the required supplies to perform these abortions. In the rare event of a complication requiring hospitalization, they coached the women on how to demand care without revealing any identifying information. The full story of Jane is a fascinating one, and I'd encourage anyone who is interested to pick up a copy of the book itself. But I'd like to move now to what are the lessons and inspirations that we can draw in our own circumstances. First, we must acknowledge the requirement for a diversity of tactics. Jane was far from the only group fighting for reproductive justice at that time, and neither were they the only group working to directly coordinate access to abortion, as shown by the example of the Reverend Moody and the clergy consultation group. Different people have different skills and opportunities to support the movement, some financially, some in a public capacity, and others in other ways. There are many examples of Jane referring women to New York for treatment, as well as the contact phone number for Jane being shared at women's liberation meetings in Chicago. The unique role of the collective was to address an acute need. Then, as now, there are people in crisis seeking abortions. This group was under no illusion that they could single-handedly solve the issue of abortion access. They simply chose to do the work of providing this service to as many women as they could. Today, there are already similarly situated groups gearing up to provide these services across state lines where necessary, but many of these groups will need resources. We must additionally take seriously the nature of this problem. The activities of Jane were illegal and they entailed risks. It is instructive that they perceived and leveraged their relative privilege in the face of those risks. Today, however, the ideological and perhaps theological drive to criminalize abortion is much different than it was in 1967. The risks of this activity perhaps are increasing in scale. Anti-choice forces are heavily organized and driven to threaten and punish those seeking to provide these services. Additionally, contemporary technology offers new opportunities and challenges. First, the opportunity for communication and connection across the country, but challenges in how trackable and how visible individuals will be. I connect this back to where I started with the anti-trans legislation that is being passed throughout this country, because I see these things all as a piece and all fitting under the umbrella of our own human rights. For many of us, refusing to act is no longer an option. One has only to look at Clarence Thomas' concurrence in Dobbs to see where the forces of reaction wish to push to next. The right to marry, the right to contraception, and the right to exist as an out queer person are under threat. I believe our liberation is bound together by the thread of solidarity. One tear and the seams will be ripped apart. What was true for Jane then is true for us now. We must keep each other safe. Nobody is going to come in and fix everything for us. We must vote and we must speak and we must march, and yet we must acknowledge that no amount of voting or speaking or marching will help a pregnant person in crisis. If that person should call for Jane, who now will answer? Thank you.
As we extinguish the challenge, the chalice, let us hold in our hearts the sacredness of choice. Let us take on and trust each other with the responsibility of our own living, to make the choice to co-create a loving community. Our closing hymn is 157, Step by Step, and Bruce will play that through for us at least once until I figure it out. Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly done, singly done. And by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn the mill, singly done, singly none.
As we began with choice, so will we end. By our choices, we may uphold a tradition of justice and peace. We may continue to bring light to the dark places and to help a world desperately in need. Today, we face a different set of circumstances than the members of Jane 50 years ago. We must adapt our strategies to the present situation. We have more tools than ever to support reproductive justice, but these tools require hands to wield them. What comes next is up to us, as a community and as individuals. How will each of us rise to the challenges before us? Who will do what's necessary to keep our community safe? Should anyone be interested, there is a rally being held today between noon and 2 p.m. in support of reproductive justice. It is being organized by Planned Parenthood and the Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, and the location will be on the west side of the Capitol. This service has ended, and our service in the wider world continues. Peace, amen, and may it be so.